Well, if you knew how much trouble trying to make these videos has been for me, and I can't even explain why. But I feel like I've said the same material. Well, this will be my fourth time trying to get this thing right. Oh my goodness. So I'm really tired of listening to myself talk about this same thing over and over. But here we go. So in Moritz, as he begins talking about the language of image of God, and I'm not even sure now anymore what I said in the first video. I got too many things between now and then. So if I repeat myself, please forgive me. But right away, he's shifted to language that any good biblical scholar would warn him against. The heading says the image of God in humans, and he actually does this quite a bit. If you don't get anything else from me, get this. Don't put that in a paper. The biblical language is rare to begin with, but even in its rarity, it is that Adam, as humanity, is created in God's image, which is very different from saying that the image of God is like something in us, which is the language that he goes to right away, the image of God in humans. You see, what happens there is, I will just say that by the time we get done with all these, you'll see that I'm convinced that the language of image of God is more along the lines of like representation of God or reflecting God, like an image, like a mirror image in a sense. That the human creature is created to mirror or reflect God. So it's not about something within us. It's about much more about some kind of relationship of reflection, we'll say for now. So humanity in the image of God is then terribly often changed to the image of God in humanity. And then the race is on to try to identify, okay, what is it that's the image of God in us? And traditionally, the language, just over and over for centuries, was the image of God in man. And then and then you fill in the blank. And the blank was most often filled with, I would say, with reason, that human reason is like the image of God in humanity. John Wesley rejected that. I don't know that he did a whole lot better. His most typical understanding was that the image of God in humanity is to be identified with the soul within the body of each human. I really don't like that much at all. But in any case, the big idea here is I would warn against the notion of thinking of the image of God as something in us, and then we try to figure out what that something is. Nonetheless, in his first paragraph there on 199, Moritz does talk about the limited tendency. There certainly have been Christian theologians and rabbinic thinkers, Jewish, rabbis of the first, we'll say 5-6 centuries of the Common Era or Christian era, who thought of humans in God's image as being some kind of physical resemblance that would imply that God also has physicality, and indeed apparently some kind of physicality not entirely unlike ours. This has not been a majority opinion. I would say for several reasons. Certainly we can start with the text that I put on the board on Tuesday from the Gospel of John, where Jesus says God is spirit. Now, it's not self-evident what that means, but we can say it doesn't seem to encourage the idea that God is body. It might be that spirit and body are not mutually exclusive, but I will say this, that typically in Christian interpretation, the statement that God is spirit has strongly discouraged the notion that somehow God is a physical body and that the image of God that human beings somehow possess or reflect is in a physical resemblance. That just hasn't been typically affirmed. Part of the reason beyond that God is spirit is that you'd have the problem. Remember that the language of humanity created in the image of God, found in Genesis 1, explicitly then talks about Adam, or humanity, as male and female. So it isn't like you have this male who's the primordial human who could then maybe be in the image of God, and then you get the woman later and she apparently isn't really. That won't work. In Genesis 1, Adam as human or humanity is already male and female. And so if we were to push for the physical resemblance idea, we would either have to, maybe come up with sort of an androgynous notion for God's body, if God has one, and I know there are biblical scholars out there who think this might be the case, that Genesis is suggesting that God is a body, presumably like a male one, but that God has a female consort or partner deity. This, of course, did not win the day in Jewish interpretation, and certainly doesn't have much place in Christianity, other than in LDS. I'm making this video in place of class because tomorrow morning I'll be on my way to Salt Lake City and then to Provo to talk with dear friends of ours who are, of the belief that in fact God is a body, and presumably as Father, a body not entirely unlike the male body on planet Earth, that God has, that there is a heavenly mother. I don't think there's too much speculation on how they make babies, but they're making a lot of them because you and I are embodiments or incarnations of pre-existent souls that our Heavenly Father and Mother reproduced. Not to get too far afield, but the point being that all within the broad range of what we'll call Christendom, Mormons or LDS is the one branch, albeit considered a heterodox branch, that has taken very seriously the idea of a physical, bodily similarity between God and the human, and that this would be the way to understand humanity created in God's image. I don't accept this notion. I mean, among other things, besides sort of the things I've already mentioned, God is spirit. How would we think about God and gender in this case? And because the female body would presumably be just as much an image or reflection of the divine body. But then you also have the problem of, if God is a body, how big? Let's start it that way. How big? Because remember, we're not talking about Jesus. We're not talking about Jesus as a human being. We're talking about God and being created in God's image, and the notion that maybe that image is somehow a physical resemblance. I do think there's been some Jewish, within Jewish theological, speculation over the centuries. There were those that kind of made probably wild guesses about if they believed that God had a body, how big that body would be. But really, like even if you said it was bigger than planet Earth, or if you said it was as big as our solar system, a really, really big body, we know that that's actually infinitesimally small in light of the size of the universe. If we were to actually think of God as having or possessing or being a body, something like the human body, you just have a really odd notion of God as creator, kind of located presumably somewhere in the universe because it's a body, or maybe like right outside the edge of the universe, if the universe even has an edge. Like, where is this body located? And so, obviously, ideas about not only God is spirit, but God is omnipresent or present everywhere really suffers under the notion that God is a locatable body. There's all kinds of like traditional notion. Well, just that God is invisible and present in all places is tough to reconcile with God having a body. And again, just the notion of God as the creator of this vast universe, but being a body, let's say, like again, even the size of the Milky Way galaxy, that's still, you'd have this this actually very, very small body engineering this huge universe, like sort of, I guess. I mean, once you think of God as a body, it's difficult not to think of that body as somehow part of the furniture of the universe, and then, which actually LDS people do believe. See, it does fit with their cosmology, but not really with a Christian cosmology to say that God has a body. I hope I'm finishing enough of my sentences that you get the thoughts, essentially. So there are a lot of problems with this. He goes on then beyond this to what he calls a second time honored interpretation, which is about attributes within the human shared with God. And you'll see there that the leading candidate here has always been reason. Like, that human reason is the image of God in humans. Again, messing with the biblical language, which is not about the image of God within the human or within all humans, but rather humans in the image of God. But on page 200, not surprisingly, the Jewish philosopher who's mentioned as thinking of the image of God as reason is the famous and beloved Philo of Alexandria. His dates are listed there as 20 years before the Common Era to 50 years into the Common Era, which does mean, in fact, that his whole life embraced the time of Jesus, born before Jesus, died after Jesus' time. Philo was in Alexandria of Egypt, contemporary with Jesus. And not surprisingly, I'll say again, did think of reason, because he's a Hellenistic philosopher, of reason as like the divine image. But again, all of these positions that make the image of God into something like a thing or a substance or a faculty or an ability, all of them sort of miss the boat biblically, because the Bible never talks about the image of God that way. Certainly doesn't say that it's something in humans, let alone identify it with some human quality or capacity. So we pause here, not having yet solved the problem of what does it mean to be created in God's image.